Hi, I'm Wayne Tuttle, and welcome to Chasing Legends. Welcome back. Please go to our website, www.legendssuperstitionmountains.com. Please hit subscribe, hit the notification bells, leave a comment, check out everything we got. We're going to get right to it this week and hope everybody had a happy Father's Day and is having a wonderful Juneteenth. Okay. With that all said and done, this next story is someone who actually recently contacted me. Occasionally someone will try to get my phone number and gets a hold of me. I'll see the phone number doesn't say spam or junk or something, and I'll answer it thinking it's work related because there's quite a lot of people, troublemen, and people in the electrical utilities industry that'll be calling me from the field. And I'm thinking, okay, I got to see who it is. I can't just ignore calls. And in this case, it was someone that called and was like, oh, is this Wayne Tuttle? And then I kind of know where it's going. And my first question is, how did you get my number? But anyways, we started having the discussion. The individual's name is Mike. I'm allowed to say that. We talked for probably about an hour. And he said he'd wanted to get a hold of me and talk to someone because it wasn't related really necessarily to the Lost Dutchman Mine, the TV show, the stone maps, anything like that. It was general about the Superstition Mountains in a certain area. And he wanted to know what I kind of knew about the area and so forth, and if I had had any experiences like he had. And he said it was just an unusual story. And I was a little intrigued because he sounded kind of down to earth. And I'll tell you the story. He gave me permission, said, if you want to do this for one of these Chasing Legends, it'd be great. He says, I do watch the show. But he said he's not the kind of guy who wants to do YouTube and stuff. He likes to look at this stuff. He's not really talked about it a lot. It was him and two other buddies out in this situation. So we'll roll from there. So it's deer hunting season about 4 years ago. And they had hunted in areas, and I believe he said they drew tags and worked out by Tortilla Ranch and out by Pinot Creek before. But they had an area down south of Peralta Road. And he asked me if I was familiar with the area, and he says, do you know where the road cuts off going back towards that ranch? And he said, not the first, there's a road that goes back by that mine that's in that cut. And I said, yes, I'm very familiar, the DeCook mine. He said, well, the next road, there's a road goes back to the creek from the ranch. And I said, I know where you're talking. I've been down in that area. I'm very familiar. He said, well, we had gotten back in there and we set up camp. And he said it was the day before season started. And he said, we went back, spent the first afternoon that day after we set up camp and stuff. We sat in the area to see if there was anything in the area we could catch. And he said, we just glassed the area and scouted the area a little bit. He said, we didn't do a lot of walking, but we kind of got an elevated position, used the spotting scopes and using some binoculars and just glassed the area just to see what we could see. He said, we really didn't see anything. So there was a couple of does, mule deer, and he said a coyote, but other than that, I really didn't see anything. So they made a plan. The first day open, they were going to head out by the Quarter Circle U, south of there on the south side of the creek and so forth, because they knew there were bighorn sheep in there, so they figured there's water sources. They probably could run into some muleys back in there. So he said the next day, that's the area they had. He said it wasn't quite out towards the ranch, but he said they were looking at those canyons going back in there, and they found a couple good spots, and they spent the early morning, and part of one was in one spot, and then he said that we worked over and found a different area and got an elevated position and watched another area. He said we saw some bighorn sheep a couple times, groups of 3 to 5. He said we saw a couple coyotes, but he said we didn't really see anything else. He said we didn't even see a spiked buck, anything. And he said we were thinking, man, this kind of sucks. They had scouted the area before and they'd seen a couple bucks, so they got back to their camp. He said we stayed out. I believe he said it was till almost dusk. He said we kind of pulled it together before dusk, and then we worked our way back to our camp. Sat back into our camp. Decided the next day to kind of move more southwest. So the next day they got up, they went out, they got on the far side of the creek area, and they started working up in those areas. And he said We didn't really have much better luck. We kind of worked the same plan. We kind of knew there was several areas, so we'd probably the next couple of days work our way into the couple of these different spots. He said we saw a group of muleys, but he said there was some does. They couldn't tell if there was a young buck or any bucks in the vicinity. So they kind of like watched the area, thought it might be a promising area, find a different position, and work their way back in there the following day. He said it got kind of later, the sun's going to go down later, so they'd make their way back. They grabbed up their gear, started working their way back. He said we were in an elevated position. We start to work our way around and down. And he says you're kind of higher up on that one side, and we're working our way down and around, taking our time, because he said, again, it's dusk, and we're still kind of looking to see if there's anything out and about, if we can see anything, any kind of traffic or any game trail that might seem promising for the next day. So he said as they're working, and they're working east now, kind of northeast to east, and he said then we saw what looked like a little bit of a glow. First he said we thought it was a campfire, and we kind of thought, well, it can't be headlights, because they didn't know of any road that crossed that area, went back in there. I don't know of anything that there would have been headlights, but he said it was kind of a glow, an orangish glow. And he said we kind of noted it. We're like, wow, wonder what's going on there. And they're trying to kind of work where their camp is, realize it's nothing to do with their camp, because that was a worry for them, is like someone in our camp with the vehicles, something like that. And he's like, no, we were still quite far out from the camp. We could see it. So they worked their way around, and they got to a certain position. He said we could look over, and it was like yellow, orange, reddish light. And he said, I can't tell you if it was a circle. He said it was a spot, and it was kind of arced what we could see. And we thought something must be on fire, must be a brush fire of some sort. He said it wasn't large and significant, but we were looking at it and figured it must be some sort of brush fire going on down there. He said it was kind of odd, because the thing he kept mentioning to me always was we never saw flames, we never smelled smoke while we were approaching. We're in the area. But he said it looked like kind of when you're at the campfire looking down in the embers, and he said like really hot, and it was orange and yellow and red, but it was about, probably his guesstimate was about 8-10 feet off the ground. So he said you would think it was pretty prominent, but it was just like, it didn't make any sense. He said you could sort of see the distortion of the heat above it. We kind of glassed at it, but it was just, we couldn't make anything of it from where we were. So we just figured, well, we're going to head that way. And I think the idea was they were going to kind of skirt down close to it, heading back to their camp, and they get a better eyes on it, and then try to pinpoint it, and then probably go in and call the sheriff's department and report it, is that there's a fire and where specifically it was. So they got down and they got close, and he said there was a point where we lost kind of view of it. We were kind of almost level in an area, and we couldn't quite tell where it was. We knew where it was, but it was kind of blocked from our view. And he said we come around the corner and there's nothing there. And we're looking over where it was, and he said at that point we were all kind of like, we don't want to go in and kind of report this thing, or we better head over there and kind of look and see if we can get eyes on it again to say where it was. And he said we couldn't have been more than 400 or 500 yards from it the first times, but he said now we felt like we were a lot closer. So he said they started going and kind of agreeing where they thought it would have been. He said they got up to a spot, and he said he couldn't tell the shape of it or anything, but he said we got in this area and it was different. And he said the first thing was there was a smell. It was like burnt hair, burnt wire, rubber. He said it was really this kind of weird smell. And they're all kind of smelling it and looking around trying to figure out why they smelled it. And he said it wasn't like a chemical smell, but it was like kind of if you had like a fire of a bunch of trash and there was hair and carpet and rubber and stuff in it. He said it was real stinky. And they're all looking around trying to figure out, because they're not seeing anything burnt, any charring, anything of any sort. And he said we're walking around, the plants all seemed to be drooping. And he said it was like, it wasn't like a crop circle or something, but you could see a particular area, and then you would kind of take a step or two away from it, and everything would be fine. The plants would look kind of fine, but the other ones were kind of a little lilted, like there'd been some heat. But he said in particular what bothered them a lot was they were take those plants or the grass, any of the weeds in the area. He said they take their hands and rub it up to their hands, and they could smell that burnt, nasty smell, but it wasn't oily. It wasn't like there was something on his hands. So he said they were all kind of like a little thrown off. It wasn't until they left that the last thing that they would experience there happened. He said, we went to leave. It's getting dusk. It's cooling down. And we didn't think anything of it till we just really started to leave the area and everything warmed up. And then we realized it was at least 10 degrees, 12, 15 degrees cooler in that area than it was outside that area. And he said that made absolutely no sense to him. So they kind of chit-chatted about it, thought about it, discussed it, said, well, we're not seeing anything burning. What are we going to report? He said, just so you know, there was no craft, nothing like that. We didn't see anything, hear anything other. We didn't hear anything sounding like a burning or any noise or anything. We just saw that orange, yellow, whatever, and the smell, and then the cooler air. So he said they made their way back down to camp. It's dark by the time they get in, they eat. And he said it bothered them. They kept looking over that direction, even though they probably couldn't see it from their camp. But they kept bothering them, like they're looking to see if something happens again. They finally went to bed. Now, the next day they got up because they fully decided what they were going to do is go back and work not just that area, but the areas they were in before. But on the way through, because it would be daylight and much better light, they were going to walk back through kind of that area and kind of retrace their steps and look at that site again to see if they could come up with an idea of what they think they saw, because they all kind of saw the same thing. So they started heading out, and as they were walking, they were talking to each other, and I guess they all were talking like they thought they slept okay, but they had bad dreams all night. They said it was just, I don't know what I was dreaming, I don't know what was going on in my head, but it was just, I just feel like I just had bad dreams. And Mike told me, he said, I can't remember anything about it. All I can tell you is I woke up with the feeling of like just, I really had bad dreams all night and didn't really get any rest. So they got up to the site. Everything's normal. He said the plants looked normal. Everything. They knew they had the right spot because before they left, they made a little pylon of rocks, a little cairn. And he said it was about 2 feet high. And he said we could see some of our footsteps in the area. So we could tell we were in the right same place and everything we did. He said I was even able to tell where there was this little bit of a tree where I broke piece off, and I saw where it was, and I knew I had smelled it, and it had the smell. That smell was gone. Everything about it was gone. So, and it sounds like just an unusual story, and I'm listening to him discuss the story, and I'm like, I know the area. I kind of know where he's at. I looked over and thought about is just anything I've ever heard of remotely like this. And I thought, no, I've heard stories of something, but nothing like this. And he said, no, and he wasn't doing the honestly, this is true, I wouldn't lie to you, none of that. He was just telling the story straight through. He said once they kind of were that day and kind of finishing that day, they all just kind of felt like, yeah, I'm done. And they got back to camp, and he said it was really odd because afterwards they thought about it and realized it was kind of like you feel like, oh, one guy was kind of like, I just want to go home. Oh, okay, whatever. But he said all of us were like that. We were all just kind of like, yeah, let's just pack it up. And he said it was just total, like, we just didn't care. And he said that was odd. He said we just literally nothing. So we got all our stuff together, and he said we left. And I didn't think much of it. We didn't talk about it, he said. We really never discussed that whole thing. He said about a year later, because they would usually sometimes hunt in an area, and he kind of felt particular, like we really never got a shot at the area, and we knew there should be something, some game in there. He thought, I want to go out and scout again. So he said that spring, after that fall, he said the next spring he told the other two guys, hey, let's go back out that same area, let's scout that area, and we'll scout a couple other areas. And they said, nah, we don't, nah. And he was like, what do you mean? And they're like, nah, we don't want to go back. And they said, they got home, and they said they just couldn't sleep good, and the whole thing. They said, I don't know why, I just don't want to go back and hunt there or anything. And he said, he went back out one day with his wife and a couple of kids. He has 2 girls. And he said, we went out and we drove and we parked. And he said, I just wanted to tell my wife, we weren't going to hike up to this spot. But he said, I wanted to pull over and just kind of show him, this is where that happened, you know. It's kind of, and he figured that would get it out of his system a little. He'd get out there and feel very normal. And he said it was absolutely opposite reaction. He said, I got out there. I never thought anything of it. I thought, well, we had some, it was just a weird experience, that. But he said, I went out and we pulled over. We got out of the truck, and he said, it didn't take me very long just to feel like I just wanted to leave. I was just done for the day. I just wanted to go home. He said it just felt like mentally I was fatigued. And he said, but other than that, there was nothing he could say remotely like anything paranormal, anything about it other than that kind of fire thing. I would have to say, while I'm not one given into these stories much, and I will tell them, I kind of wondered, I wonder what he saw. And I realized just the mannerism of way he spoke. And he said, if you want to talk about it in person, we can meet for coffee. But he says, I don't really have anything to add to it, because he was pretty detailed. And I was like, no, I believe you, because I said, I don't know what it is, but it was just some general thing of it was an individual that in a very unusual circumstance. And he couldn't quite grasp, and he was looking for someone that could tell him something similar without it going off into the far reaches of somewhere. Have you heard of anybody? Is there anyone with a shared experience like that, especially that area? And I've spent a lot of time in that area. And I had to tell him, honestly, I've never even heard anyone bring anything up like that from that area. I've spent some time in those canyons. I know Randy Wright has. I know Howard Hornick spent a lot of times riding back and through there when I talked to Howard a lot. And Howard had some odd stories about some things, but nothing like that. And I had to tell him, honestly, I've never heard anything remotely like that. I don't know what you saw, what it could be, but I said, well, if you like, I can tell the story, and then maybe someone out there will have. I know there will be some other things come in, but there might be someone with something rationally that says, hey, no, I know someone, or something tangible, or I've heard of that, and it's something that he can kind of catch, and maybe he goes through the comments and says, oh, that's kind of what it is. Because sometimes mentally, psychologically, you can be affected by something that you have no explanation. I've seen people have a great amount of fear and a lot of issues with something in particular that there's nothing really there, but because it's unexplained to them, it can cause them a lot. So we had a really good talk. I don't know if I'll ever hear from him again, but that's Mike's story. And particularly what I took away from it was the one thing, is the area was very cool. Even though he kept saying it's like hot embers, he said it was very much like when you're staring in the fire with the embers, the orange and yellow glow going on. And he said that's what we saw. There was no, it was just kind of like the heat at the top. You could see kind of like how hot it was. But he said, when we got there was no charring, there was nothing there. It was like extreme heat that wilted things, but it didn't seem to affect or char anything. So very odd. I don't know if anyone's ever had any experience like that, but that's a cool one. Kind of bridges a lot of different areas. It's an area I'm sure quite a few people have been in. It's still, I think that spot is still the gates, while they move the gates up because of a lot of traffic and a lot of problems in there. I think that area is still accessible, and you can get back in there between that part of the area and the county park now. So there you go. We'll have to label this one the cold fire, because that's kind of what it was. It was a cold fire of some sort. Anyways, to Mike and his buddies, which he didn't give me their names, he felt probably keep the best for privacy and all. Hope to see him at the rendezvous. Hope to see everybody else out there in November. And maybe Mike will come by and we'll all get to sit around and Mike will tell his story firsthand to a group of us around a campfire, which would be awesome. Maybe there's something he'll remember, even though he was I pretty much let him do all the talking, and he talked for most of the hour, and I would just ask a question and listen and make notes. So very excellent story. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike, for watching, and thank you for chiming in with something really cool to talk about. So that's it for this week. Hope everybody enjoys the weekend. Hope everybody enjoys this week. Next weekend we're heading to the 1-teens. So it's going to change here in Arizona. Yes, it's about to get very, very hot for the rest of the summer. So always remember, until the next time, I'm Wayne Tuttle, you're not, and this was Chasing Legends.